When you play the Game of Thrones, you
subscribe and like,
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to be doing my top 10 favorite houses in A Song of Ice and Fire. I put out a poll a couple weeks back asking kind of what your guys' favorite slash best house was, and it got a lot of mixed results. You guys had a lot of interesting answers, and we're talking about my top 10. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow, reach your people that might like this channel as well. And let's get into the video. Also, pushing to 1,000 subscribers. Thank you guys for all the support as always. And let's get into it. So, number 10, I have the Blackfires. I don't know if you consider them a house, just because really they're kind of the golden company and they've never really had any type of land in Westeros. So I don't know if they're actually considered a house. But for my own personal interests, they're going to be on the list. So number 10 I have is the Blackfires. Now, to me, they are a very intriguing house just based upon how they're kind of the off-brand Targaryens, right? They are basically the bastards, right, of the Targaryens, and they incite a ton of rebellions. They're a really interesting house to kind of look at and study. And they're also, I think, still going to be involved in the main story as well with Aegon or Young Griff. So again, really an intriguing house for me. And yeah, not much else I got to say. Also, I think they have a really cool sigil and all that stuff. And I really find the Golden Company kind of lore very interesting as well. Let me know if you guys want me to do a Golden Company video or a video just talking about the Blackfires in general. But yeah, they definitely, in my opinion, needed to be on the list. Number 9, a house that's probably not as known if you're not someone that reads, Fire and Blood or have kind of read into the Targaryen histories, because by the time of the main story in A Song of Ice and Fire, this is very much a minor house. But number 9 is going to be the Valerians. Now, the most famous of Valerian being the Sea Snake, and we will also see House Valerian. They're a very prominent house during the Dance with Dragons, and for the Targaryens, for the most part, the Valerians are one of the biggest supporters of the Targaryens. They have one of the best navies during the time, and they are very influential into how events play, and having the Valerians on your side is a huge benefit when we look at their navy. I would compare the Valerians to kind of the Greyjoys in the normal story, where they are very different, where the Valerians can actually have loyalty and all that stuff. In the main story, they are one of the few houses that support Stannis at the very beginning. But looking at the Valerians from the point of view of, they are very much a naval sea power, right? As the Greyjoys are in the normal story, everyone is trying to get the Greyjoys to be on their side, because having a major naval power on your side is key and is very important to any war effort. So I really love their kind of lore and the way they are involved in a lot of the Targaryen kind of politics and Fire and Blood. And hopefully we'll get to see more of that in Fire and Blood Part 2. But yeah, also, I'm calling it Fire and Blood Part 2. I don't like how George just switched the name and was like, it's cool. I'm just going to call it Fire and Blood Part 2. It's simpler. Now, that is number 9. Number 8 is going to be the Hightowers. Now, this is a weird one. You guys probably didn't think I was going to put them on here if you've watched a lot of my Maester Conspiracy videos. Again, every time I bring those up, I always recommend you guys watch those videos. I believe, personally, on my channel, those are some of my best videos I've ever made. Just a lot of research went into those videos. But getting to the point, number 8, the Hightowers. They are not, again, another house that's not very prominent in the main story. Right, we're yet to really see the Hightowers be a main kind of focal point of the story. I think they are going to be a major factor in Winds of Winter and getting into the end game and later parts of the books. But for now, I'm very much looking at the Hightowers from their kind of position in Targaryen history as well. So as we'll see with a lot of these earlier, I guess, rankings in this top 10, a lot of them are focused on Targaryen history. And specifically, I want to talk about the Dance with the Dragons segment of Targaryen history, because the Hightowers are very prominent and they gain a ton of power in this time period. Something we're going to see in House of the Dragon is that the Hightowers are very much kind of like the Lannisters, right? Where the Lannisters gain a ton of power off of the falling of the Targaryen kind of dynasty and regime. And we see the Hightowers do something similar, where Otto Hightower I think is very similar to a character like a Tywin, and we see how much power they gained, where they're in a position of controlling the crown with the Greens and their power. So I think they're a very intriguing house, and they're an intriguing kind of house to study when you look at their connection to the Maesters, and how I believe there is a connection there, and they are involved with kind of the downfall of the Targaryens as a whole, with things like the Dance with Dragons and all these other situations that they are kind of linked to. So again, I would recommend watching those videos if you want more context of where I'm coming from with the Hightowers related to the Targaryens and the Dragons. But that is kind of where I am with them. Number 7 is going to be the Martells. They're just cool in general. I mean, Oberyn Martell, in my opinion, if we did a top 10 like coolest characters, maybe not favorite characters, but like coolest, definitely in there. You don't get a name like the Red Viper without being a badass. So the Martells, again, also being the only major house or kingdom to repel the Targaryens and the dragons. The way Dorne actually kind of came into the kingdoms was kind of through diplomacy and marriage. So again, the Martells really awesome in that kind of regard. The Martells are very similar to kind of Russia in today's kind of way, I guess. Not the Ukraine stuff, not that stuff. But I mean, is like anytime Russia's ever been invaded, it's not really gone well for the invader. That's kind of how the Martells are in Westeros, right? Anytime anyone tries to invade them, it's a very bloody conquest, and in the end, it doesn't work out anyway, because Dornish people, again, are very resilient, and that's just talking about that part of it. The Martells as well, Arianne is one of the most intriguing characters for me going into Winds of Winter. I really am intrigued to see where her character goes. I don't think the House Martell is going to have a happy ending, but it is interesting to see how much plotting Duran's doing, and how much plotting goes on in Dorne, and I think that makes the Martells very intriguing. Now, one spot higher than them are their best friends. At number 6, the Tyrells. Tyrells, to me, are a very underrated house. Now, to be fair, in Westeros kind of history, they're actually a fairly newer house of prominence. The Tyrells do not really become a major house until Aegon's conquest, where the Tyrell that had been the steward, I believe, ends up actually yielding the castle to Aegon. Like, the gates were open, there was no conflict, so Aegon rewarded him with Highgarden and the Reach as a whole. And the Tyrells, that is very much kind of how the Tyrells work. They're a house that doesn't get themselves dirty, and they don't get bloody, but they always come out in a very favorable and good position. If we look at the War of the Five Kings, right, and I think the Tyrells are going to get their comeuppance, well, not comeuppance, but they're eventually going to get drawn into the war and stuff like that, and actually start losing things in the next book or two. But the Tyrells, think about it. The War of the Five Kings ravages the Riverlands. The North is invaded. The Westerlands are invaded by Robb, and they bleed heavily because of the campaigns Robb ends up doing. The Vale is really the only, or the Eyrie is the only really other place that doesn't get affected by the war. The Crownlands heavily affected. The Baratheons and the Stormlands heavily affected. The Dornish, losing Oberyn, you know, they don't lose as much either, but the Tyrells end up not losing any men, no supplies. They have the most food in the realm, and they come out on top. They are in a position of really the most power, besides possibly the Lannisters in the main story, for quite a long time in the story. So you really have to admire the way they're able to play the game. Also, they have the GOAT, Olenna Tyrell, as well as Marjorie as well, two really brilliant characters alongside of characters like Garland, Willis, and Loras Tyrell as well. So a lot of really interesting characters for the Tyrells, and a really interesting way of how they came into power, being very opportunistic during Aegon's conquest. Number 5, this might be a shock. This is not a major, I guess, house on the scope of it when you look at all the rest of these houses. All of these houses at one point or another are very high up in power. Now, number 5 for me is the Manor Lees. The Manor Lees are a very intriguing house because they're very different from the rest of the North. Whereas a lot of the North believes in the old gods and the old traditions, the Manor Lees are very different. They actually ended up coming from the South, and they were given, you know, land. by the Starks, and that's kind of what we see in A Dance with Dragons, why we see that Wyman Manor Lees is so loyal to the Starks because of all that. And the Manor Lees, to me, are just a very intriguing house, because on the face value of it, they're just kind of fat people that are lazy, and they don't really do anything. But when you really get into it, they're one of the most powerful houses in all of the Seven Kingdoms, having a really strong port in White Harbor, having a pretty strong navy at the point of the story. Wyman had been building up ships, and also commanding a lot of troops. They were probably at least in the top 3 houses in the north. They're also a very rich house. So seeing how the Manor Lees are, and I really love Wyman Manor Lee as a character. I do believe in the Frey Pie theory. I would check out my video on that if you wanted to get more information on that. I did a video on that as well. And I just think the Manor Lees are a really cool house. I like their sigil. I like their words. So to me, Manor Lees deserve to be in this top 10. Maybe you guys disagree. I kind of liked them in the top 10 and even into my top 5. So getting into my top 4, these are going to be the, kind of a spoiler, but these are going to be my 4 most prominent houses, right? I did that poll. These were the 4 to put on there besides the other category. Now, number 4 is going to be the Lannisters. Now, even though this is kind of the villain house of the story, I still love the Lannisters because of how morally complex all of their characters are, how rich their character arcs are. Tyrion, Jaime, even Cersei. They have the greatest villain probably in one of them in book history being Joffrey. Tywin is just a major badass manipulator, probably the best player of the Game of Thrones. So you really can't hate on the Lannisters in too much. I think they have a really strong sigil and words, and they just have a really rich history in general. The way we, are brought to you, or we kind of learn more about Tywin and the Lannisters, backstory with the reigns of Castamere and all that's constantly brought up as well. So for me, I think the Lannisters need to be on this list. I don't know if you can make a list without the Lannisters being in your, I guess, best or favorites. But to me, I like the Lannisters even though they are the bad guys. Number 3 is going to be the Starks. So this was, I believe, the favorite from that poll, being the Starks, and I like the Starks. When I first read the books, the Starks were my favorite house. When I also read the show, the Starks were also my favorite house. Now, I think that's kind of on purpose. I think George makes you like the Starks. And again, don't get me wrong. If your favorite house is the Starks, makes complete sense. They have some of the strongest characters in the show. Or not the show, the books. Well, the show too, but the books. So you have Arya, very strong character, one of our main POVs. We have Jon, where he's not a Stark confirmed yay or nay yet, but he is Ned's bastard with canon at the moment. So he technically is a Stark. However you feel about Sansa, major character as well. The Starks also have a rich history up in the north, with everything connecting to the others, and hopefully we'll kind of get that paid off as well. And Bran the Builder. There's just so much deep history about the Starks. They also, I believe, probably have the second best sigil, and they have the best words. Winter is coming. Classic. You really can't hate on the Starks too much. I'm also going to be getting a ring with the direwolf or the Stark, sigil on, for my hand. And I think that's going to look really cool. I'm excited to show you guys that when I eventually get it. But, yeah, I really don't think you can hate the Starks. Number 2 is going to be the Baratheons. This might be a surprise to you guys, because you guys know I like my Baratheons. In the normal story, I like my Stannis, I like my Robert, I even like Renly for how misguided he is. I really love the Baratheons' kind of sigil, their words, even though it's kind of stolen from another house in Aegon's Conquest when, the Baratheons were given the seat of power. It was actually House Durrandon that they took a lot of those things from. But the Baratheons in the main story are some of the most complex characters along with Stannis, and just completely different ideologies, and we really get a great backstory of how these 3 brothers were very separate. Robert and Renly look a lot alike, but they're very different characters when it comes down to it. And that's what I really love about the Baratheons, and this one is definitely the main story. If we look at a lot of the houses I've done on this list are kind of maybe Targaryen history plus them being cool during the normal story. This one's almost purely on just the normal story. I like the Baratheons during Targaryen lore, but they're definitely not one of my favorite houses when rereading books or rereading like Fire and Blood. But again, they are a really cool house as well. Now, number 1, this one's not a surprise, okay? It's the Freys. I mean, come on. The Freys are easily the best house, all right? They tax people. They're little trolls. They do the Red Wedding. No, I'm joking, guys. I'm joking. I'm not actually putting the Freys in number 1. I will say they're an underrated house, even though they are not great people. But they are an underrated house. But number 1 is the Targaryens. I personally love the Targaryen lore. I'm not a big fan of the Targaryens in the normal story. Like Dany, you guys know if you've seen my videos, I'm not the biggest fan of Dany. I still like Daenerys and all of that going on. But the Targaryens, the reason they're number 1, their sigil is the best sigil. You cannot debate me on that. They have the best sigil. Their like family words, Fire and Blood, really great. But look at how many deep characters they have. How many just awesome like things you can study with Targaryen history, from Aegon's conquest to the Dance of Dragons. It's amazing. And even Jaehaerys the First and his rule, very interesting things to study. And I really do like the Targaryen lore, where they come over from Valyria and they kind of are like, hey, let's unite Westeros. It's something that's kind of very similar to how maybe England was kind of brought together, where all of them had different kingdoms and then they eventually merge into one. Very different circumstances, like Aegon and all of the Valerian Targaryens or whatever come over to Westeros and then invade and then kind of unite them. But it's the same type of concept where you're uniting all of the kingdoms into one united Westeros. But that is why the Targaryens for me are number 1. I just think they have a lot of great characters. As we're going to see in House of the Dragon, a lot of awesome characters of the Targaryens. Daemon Targaryen, one of my favorite characters in all of A Song of Ice and Fire lore and even the main story. Rhaenyra Targaryen. She's probably, if I had a Song of Ice and Fire crush or whatever, it'd be Rhaenyra. I know she does some fucked things in the end, but like, we're not going to get into spoilers for House of the Dragon if any of you guys have not read the books of Fire and Blood. But some things happen that she's very mortally gray, I would say. But that is the list. Thank you guys all for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.